In San Charles de Bariloche, Argentina, we didn't meet Graciela, a young woman of 19, with fair skin, black hair, and light eyes. Graciela was a young tourism student at college. She was supported by her family, her parents Charles and Sylvia, and she had a younger sister named Rose. Graciela's family was very close, and the sisters had a great relationship. She was a dedicated student. At college, Graciela met another student who began to flirt with her named Daniel, a business student very dedicated to his course. Graciela was enchanted by Daniel, 21, a very handsome and gallant young man, dark and green-eyed. It didn't take long for Daniel to start hitting on Graciela, who at first rejected his colleagues' advances, but Daniel was a persistent and very manipulative boy. With one conversation there and another conversation here, Graciela confessed to him that she had already had 4 boyfriends in the past, but never had a relationship with any of them. Although Graciela had had 4 previous relationships, these were only flirtations or passing infatuations and nothing serious. Daniel was a little envious to know that Graciela had had previous relationships, but unlike her, Daniel wanted to try something like this. At first, he did what he could to contain these feelings, but Daniel preferred to follow his routine and dedicate himself to his studies, although from time to time, these libertine desires still entered his mind. Although Daniel was confused to know that Graciela was the only number on his list, and he thought that there should be a balance between them, Daniel and Graciela were starting their relationship. Very different from Graciela. Daniel was orphaned by his father and mother, but was raised by his aunt and uncle, who adopted him, and had a cousin who he saw as a brother and was his uncle's children. Daniel and Graciela were focused on their studies and their courses, and they gave it their all. The relationship of the 2 students was going 1,000 wonders. Daniel graduated first and soon started working. And a year later, Graciela also graduated in tourism, and they each started working in their respective jobs. Daniel working as an administrator in a Korean home appliance company, and Graciela in a tourism company. And they were living well, until a week before the wedding, Daniel curiously asked, "Love, what would you think if one day we were curious enough to open up about our relationship?" And Graciela, very intrigued but serious, replied, "If one day something like that was proposed to me, I'd file for divorce on the spot and leave without warning. Even though I've been in 4 relationships, but I've never stayed with any of them. I'm a one-man woman." Daniel at that moment said that it was just an April Fool's joke and that he would never do anything like that. But inside, Daniel was sad to know that his girlfriend was restricting him from being experienced in other relationships, without guilt or consequences. Daniel just wanted to enjoy what he thought was something different. Graciela decided to take it in her stride and believed that it wasn't serious, because she was really in love with Daniel and thought of it as a joke, but Daniel wasn't satisfied. After the week of the wedding, Daniel and Graciela went to the altar and made their vows. The families of both were happy and wished the couple well. On their honeymoon, Daniel enjoyed every moment of that intimate beginning. Daniel and Graciela didn't have children due to their work commitments. The couple enjoyed their marriage. 2 years into their relationship, things were going normally between the couple. At the company where Daniel worked, a new head of administration took over from the previous boss, a beautiful blonde, blue-eyed woman with a statuesque body. Her name was Sabrina. Daniel was enchanted by this beautiful woman, and the 2 of them were having a professional relationship in the company. But it wouldn't be long before Daniel's unholy desires began to manifest themselves, and Sabrina was also beginning to flirt with him. And the man, who was not ironclad, soon gave in, and it was Sabrina who said to Daniel, "Why don't you encourage your wife to accept the relationship and open up the marriage? It's much better than you not doing something hidden." Daniel, all excited, said, "You're right. I'm a man, and I have my needs. I'll convince Graciela to accept. If she loves me, she'll accept." And Daniel and Sabrina went to a restaurant, and after the restaurant, the 2 went to a hotel, and without any scruples, they ended up having sex. The next morning, Daniel and Sabrina were in the clouds and secretly kept their affair. Daniel wanted to have these experiences to see himself and feel like a man. The next day, believing that he could manipulate Graciela and thinking that she loved him and would agree and open their marriage. Little does Daniel know that this will be the nail in the coffin and the end of their relationship. And Sabrina continued to fill Daniel's head, and he began to have relationships with various women and crushes, feeling like a man. And one day, with all his courage, Daniel was excited to speak to Graciela, who also said she had great news. And with a smile, Daniel decided to speak first and said, "Love, I want to be sensible, and I wish we could open up our marriage and have the right to have my needs met." And the smile disappeared from Graciela's face, and a cold, apathetic expression took over the woman's gaze, and Graciela said seriously, "Listen, what are you getting at? We've been married for 2 years and you want to experiment? Do you find that interesting?" Daniel said that he felt inferior to having only one experience. He said that he had met a woman in his company and had slept with her. Daniel said that he felt completely frustrated to have only one woman on his list, in this case, Graciela, and he wanted to balance things out. Daniel was reluctant and said that he wanted to be desired and disputed by other women, because if she could have had these relationships, why couldn't he either? And as Sabrina was a boss who gave the worst advice and at the same time was one of his mistresses, Daniel said bluntly, "I just want you to know that I'm going to have to do this. I'd love it if I had your support. I don't think I can live with the fact that you're significantly more experienced than me. It makes me feel like you had to settle for me. I don't want to be a man who is content. I want to be desired and adored by other women, just like you did with other men before you met me. I don't think I can be happy if I don't do that. We're opening our marriage." The beautiful smile that Daniel saw on Graciela's face disappeared. Daniel didn't care, because he had already locked it in his mind and saw a defeated expression on her face. And after a while, she went to her room, and after that knock, Graciela stayed for a while. And at that moment, Daniel said, "I've told you what I want. Now you can tell me what you'd like to tell me. Love, now I'm going to listen to you." And then Graciela, "It's nothing, Daniel. I'm tired. It's just something about work. It's no big deal." And Daniel stood there saying that it wasn't something eternal. It was just something temporary. Graciela wasn't a woman who expressed her emotions. You never knew what she was planning. Just a smile on her face defined her. And the next day, without hesitation, Daniel went into the arms of his boss, Sabrina, and he felt like the king of the universe. He received the treatment of a woman other than Graciela. And little did Daniel know that he was digging the grave where he was burying his marriage. He went out with his work colleagues and had fun in the nightclubs, and stayed with different women, and Graciela had to put up with it for 3 months. But Graciela was already secretly planning how she would get revenge on her husband. Graciela was not a woman of words. She acted, and she decided to act in the shadows and make Daniel regret it bitterly. And Graciela would collect the bill with interest and corrections. One day, Sabrina went to Daniel's house to pick Daniel up to go to work. Daniel was in the shower when he saw his wife and Sabrina talking, and they looked like 2 friends. Daniel even found it strange and even wet. He decided to see what the 2 were talking about. Daniel was putting on his clothes in a debauched but sarcastic way. Graciela said to Sabrina, "So you're the woman who goes to bed with my husband while I make breakfast?" And in a debauched way, Sabrina also said, "Yes, I was responsible for giving your relationship a bit more excitement." And Daniel said, "Yes, love, she's the woman who told you. You 2 could be friends." And Graciela politely said goodbye to both of them and even opened the door of Sabrina's car for Daniel to get in, and said goodbye. On the way, they both made jokes, and Daniel believed that his wife was taking the open marriage in her stride, and Sabrina jokingly said to Daniel, "Your wife is very funny and knows how to look at an open relationship. We could do it in front of her. What do you think?" And Daniel excitedly said, "Absolutely. I think she's fantastic, and she'll love it." And for a week, Daniel had fun with his boss and thought that Graciela was also being a joker. But Daniel was soon to see this bear fruit. Daniel was with several women besides Sabrina, every kind of woman that came along. The man was enjoying that world feeling like a teenager. Yes, Daniel had become a real tramp. Daniel stayed for 3 months having fun with several women and with his boss, Sabrina. But one Saturday, Daniel noticed that Graciela wasn't at home, and he was bothered by the silence. He noticed that the radio was off, because Graciela, even with these consensual adventures, always turned the volume up and didn't leave out the music, which was also her favorite music. Daniel went to his private gym that he had in the house and saw that his wife wasn't there. He went to the bedroom and saw that her suitcases and clothes were not in the wardrobe, and there were only her personal belongings, and went to the kitchen thinking that Graciela had made breakfast. But he saw that nothing had been done. Everything was silent, and that silence bothered Daniel more and more. He looked all over the house and didn't find it, but when he returned to the kitchen, he hadn't noticed that under a basso there was a letter. Daniel was extremely shocked to see that letter. He was afraid to open the letter, but when he shook the jar, Daniel saw the wedding ring inside. When he saw the ring inside the jar, his world began to fall apart, so he decided to open. Even if reluctantly, the letter, when he opened the letter, the content of that letter would be the end of everything he wanted. In the letter, Graciela said the following words: "Hello, dear Daniel. You know I'm a person of action and not words. I hope you had fun with your lover Sabrina and with as many others as you have out there. You, with your talk of wanting to be with several women, you've lost the only woman who ever really loved you. Everyone will soon know what you've done. I've done some research and I know about all your adventures. When you open this letter, I'll be in England. Yes, my tour company has decided to invest in me and you're going with me. My company was even thinking of giving you a job. My parents and my sister know everything you've done. And I'm not going to lie. I don't wish you anything good. You've thrown our marriage away and you're not worth the hurt you've caused me over the months with your adventures." When you said that, I thought it was a joke. But when I saw your boss coming to our house, that was the last straw. And now you have to bear the consequences of your foolish and naive behavior. You thought I was a clown. But I pretended to be a clown just to see where you go with this. Our marriage is over here. And don't worry, I haven't forgotten about your infidelity. I'm sorry I ever met you. And when I get back from that trip, we'll start our divorce and you can play all you want. Only a weak woman, without self-respect and firmness of purpose, would accept the immorality you proposed to me. My love for you died that day. I hope it was worth you having fun with Sabrina's toy and with others from your collection. I'll be in England for the next 5 years, and that's the end. Goodbye." When Daniel saw that letter, his world fell apart. And when he looked inside the letter, he saw a plane ticket. That ticket was for him, and he saw in the worst way what he had done. Daniel, who just wanted to have fun and have new experiences, didn't notice how much he had hurt Graciela, and that he was now manifesting himself. Daniel cried in that house and didn't sleep all night. On Sunday, his sister-in-law, Rose, went to his house just to get Graciela's things. Together with 2 friends who went with Rose, they took all of Graciela's belongings, the jewelry, the rest of her clothes and personal belongings, perfumes, and other things. And Rose noticed that Daniel was wearing the same clothes as when he came home from work on Friday. Daniel asked Rose to leave him at least his cap, a teddy bear, and his favorite perfume as a reminder of Graciela. Rose, in her kindness, let them keep these items for that day, only for Rose to take them away the next day, which left Daniel even more devastated and saddened to see his beloved's items being taken away. And Rose, who was not a woman to keep quiet, said to her brother-in-law, "Graciela told me everything you did. You're a disgrace to every man in the world, and I hope your life ends up like this room, empty and sad." Rose had no pity and unraveled everything she thought about it all, and washed her sister's soul clean. And Rose added, "I should spit in your face. but it's not worth wasting saliva on you. Just seeing you in this misery is punishment enough." And Rose left the house, taking her sister's belongings with her. Daniel was practically at rock bottom. He went looking for other women that same day. But that was of little consolation. He began to notice the consequences of his actions. The next day at work, he talked to Sabrina, who said nervously, "I'm transferring from here to another company. Your wife's parents and sister came here and talked about the relationship we have, and the president told me to transfer. I advise you to end this relationship and sort things out with your wife. I'm leaving." And Sabrina didn't know that it was already too late to solve this problem. The new boss who took over from the previous one was much stricter and questioned Daniel's attitudes, and it didn't take long for Daniel to be fired from the company because of the rumors. Soon he noticed that his friends began to distance themselves. His uncles and cousins denied him. For them, it was a stain on their family, since Rose went to their house and told them everything, showing proof, because Daniel's aunt and uncle didn't want to be associated with a promiscuous young man who was willing to throw his marriage away in order to venture into other women's beds. And his next relationships didn't last more than 2 months. And when the story came out that Daniel was an adventurer who cheated on his wife and stayed with several women, that love soon disappeared from those women. Daniel was more alone than ever, and now had to manage with part-time jobs that paid little. Daniel still lived in the house he bought for Graciela. The empty rooms were just as she had left them, and he kept the letter and the ticket as a reminder that he had let something so beautiful go for an adventure, and he was disappointed in himself for wanting to have more relationships. He had made several mistakes that he recognized, but letting Graciela go without a fight was for Daniel the worst of those mistakes. The years that Graciela said had passed, and Daniel even thought about looking for his ex-in-laws and his sister-in-law, but he found out that they had gone to England for some reason and waited for them to return to try to talk to them. The ex-in-laws and Rose were cold with him and said nothing about their daughter and asked Daniel not to keep questioning the fate of their daughter. As Daniel tried to talk to his in-laws and find out about Graciela, Sylvia, Graciela, and Rose's mother and ex-mother-in-law, said to her ex-son-in-law Daniel, "My daughter is doing very well in England. She doesn't want to see you or talk to you." Charles added, "You threw my marriage and my daughter's life in the trash can to have adventures. You've lost any respect we once had for you, Daniel. Now go away and stop looking for my daughter." Charles and Sylvia were very rude to Daniel, and rightly so, because in one day, he destroyed all the expectations they had of Daniel. Daniel was miserable and continued to live in that house, keeping everything intact with the hope that Graciela would return, get his forgiveness, and try to rebuild everything he had lost. With time, he could get forgiveness from his uncles and cousins, which helped him to have a little consolation. 3 years passed, and one unexpected day, Daniel decided to visit his ex-in-laws again, still hoping to hear from Graciela, and saw something very unexpected in front of his ex-in-law's house. A red-haired boy with brown eyes, an athletic and well-defined body, with 2 boys who looked just like him, having fun with Charles, who seemed very excited about the boys who were at least 2 years old, and Daniel at that moment when he saw his father-in-law, this boy with a red-haired foreign face, asked who this man at the door was. Charles quickly disguised it with Daniel, but he had already explained to the foreign boy who Daniel was, and Daniel asked insistently, "Charles, who is this guy and these boys?" And Charles nervously replied, "That boy is a distant nephew of mine, and the boys are my grandnephews. Daniel, they're distant relatives, and that's none of your business." Charles asked Daniel to go away and leave him and his family alone. Daniel noticed the nervousness on his ex-father-in-law's face, but he was so sad that he put it aside, and as time went by, Daniel still held on to the dead hope of returning to Graciela and rebuilding his life. But he couldn't imagine that it would take 10 years for Graciela to come back into his life again, and Daniel couldn't imagine the bombshell that would come with it, and the years went by, and Daniel received no news of Graciela, not a letter, a phone call, a return to Argentina, absolutely nothing. Daniel was stuck in a limbo of remorse, regret, and doubts as to why he had acted in such a way, and whether it was worth it to have exchanged a solid marriage for a life of adventure and having relationships with various women just to feel like a man. Daniel felt like a complete loser. He wasn't even looking for therapy. And further on, he passed Charles and Sylvia's business and saw that they were both prosperous and selling a lot, even living a comfortable and good life. He tried to get close to his ex-in-laws and his ex-sister-in-law, but they ignored him. But in the 10th year, things would change, and Daniel ended up receiving something that would change his life. For the first time, someone called him, and when he heard the voice, Daniel, the 36-year-old man, washed up, out of shape, and totally emotionally shattered, heard Graciela's voice on the phone, and very moved. Daniel said, "Graciela, my love, it's been a long time. I haven't heard your voice for 10 years, and I want you to know that even after all these years, I still love you and I couldn't move on. I now understand everything I've done, and I'd like to see you in person." And Graciela said over the phone in a firm voice, "Listen, Daniel, we're going to talk, but I'm warning you, don't kid yourself. I'd like to talk to you and find out what's new. That's all there is to it." Graciela and Daniel talked for exactly 2 hours, and each told the other what had happened. Graciela explained that she had suffered from that distorted vision, but that she had often felt the urge to hit Daniel, but she had self-control, and also said that she didn't go back for the next 5 years because she really needed to get over it and forget. And in England, Graciela said that it was therapy. Graciela also said that on that fateful day, she thought it was a prank or a joke, but when she saw that he was serious, that was the end of that marriage. And she couldn't forgive those infidelities. She completed by saying that she never agreed with the crazy idea of this open marriage, but she gave permission to see where he would go with all this and how far he would show his true face. And when she saw that he was serious and wouldn't back down, that for Graciela was practically the nail in the coffin and the end of their relationship. And on the phone, Daniel cried at Graciela's words, but he said that this was a hard lesson he had learned, that he had been with several women, but none of them were like Graciela, and he said that she should have helped him to stand by him, helped him to correct his mistakes, show him the errors he had made and not run away like a bird runs away from a cage, that he thought he was agreeing to see him happy with other women, and not have suffered such a blow with this sudden disappearance. And Daniel said that at first he blamed her for everything he had suffered, but that he was willing to talk to her personally and try to resolve things peacefully. And Graciela said that she would be back in Argentina in a week and said that she would just hand over the divorce papers and resolve this situation. Daniel was hopeful of sorting things out, and on the day Graciela returned to her home country and went to her old house, Daniel was excited to see Graciela again, and the man saw how beautiful, statuesque, and gorgeous the woman was, like a catwalk model, and Daniel let her explore the house. And Graciela saw that everything was just as she had left it. The wardrobes were empty, her things weren't in the house, and the letter she had left for Daniel and the plane ticket to England were still in the same place. Without having any intimacy, they decided to talk, and Daniel talked about other things he hadn't said on the phone, such as the fact that his boss had broken up with him and left him after his adventure, how he had been fired, the loss of his friends, and also the rejection from everyone, and that he had reconciled with his uncles and cousins, but that he was very unhappy. And finally, at that moment, Daniel saw Graciela's true emotions during those 10 years away. It was pity. Graciela felt only pity for what he had become, and it was at that moment that Graciela shot Daniel. "So that's why? You threw away 2 years of marriage to spend 3 months having fun with your mistresses? Believe me, I was completely disappointed, and that's why I wasn't sorry to leave you, and I took advantage of this opportunity with the trip that life gave me, as well as the divorce papers to resolve this situation. I need you to see that we have no chance of getting back together. I wouldn't want to see you again because you're sitting next to me in a room. That would be putting my happiness at risk. I've moved on, and I want you to meet someone." And at that moment, right behind Graciela, people arrived that Daniel could never have imagined would mark his life forever. They were his ex-in-laws, Charles and Sylvia, his ex-sister-in-law, Rose, and also that foreigner and two boys who were the face of this guy, who were 7 years old each. When Daniel recognized that this guy was the same one who was in the house of his ex-in-law Charles and those boys, and at that moment, Sylvia asked her daughter Rose to take the boys to another room in the house, because the subject was important and the boys couldn't overhear the conversation, and Rose obeyed her mother and took the boys from there to another corner of the house. Graciela told them everything that had happened to her in England, that there she had met someone who had changed her life, and that now she wanted to do everything legally, at which point that blonde foreign man introduced himself and said that his name was Henry Navarre, but that they could just call him by his nickname of Navarre. And Daniel realized that his ex-wife, even though she was legally married to him, ended up moving on and meeting this foreigner who at one point ended up getting pregnant, and they had these boys who looked just like their father. Daniel saw that his world fell apart with this. Navarre? Although he was an English citizen, he spoke Spanish perfectly. Navarre, unlike Daniel, was a man of honor who had personally come from his native country to resolve his beloved Graciela's problems with her ex-husband Daniel. And Navarre explained their entire history. Without hiding anything, he said that he had met Graciela. He knew that Graciela was a married woman and that she never hid it from him. But it was he who started courting her. Navarre assumed that he fell in love with Graciela at first sight, but she respectfully rejected his advances. Out of consideration for her husband, Navarre didn't try to force her to be his unwillingly, because he really was in love with her. And over time, Graciela, secure and confident, confided in him about her life in Argentina. The suffering she had endured at his hands and her infidelities, she didn't hide anything from him. Navarre was very frank and direct with Daniel, and that over time their advances had their results and they began a romance. And that one night when they couldn't contain their feelings, they ended up giving themselves to each other body and soul. And when Graciela discovered that she was pregnant and expecting his child, she was terrified of being abandoned and even wanted to go back to her home country. But Navarre himself showed that he wasn't a scoundrel and didn't abandon her. He was very happy to know that he was going to be a father, and he even said that he was willing to marry Graciela that very day. But as Graciela was still legally married to Daniel, and Navarre knew that Graciela's union with her ex-husband was just a big joke in bad taste and a farce, he decided to just have an unstable relationship. But they wanted to get married normally, and Graciela's parents found out through a phone call. Charles and Sylvia were worried about Graciela's image. But when they saw that Navarre hadn't abandoned their daughter and had taken on their children and was wanting to marry Graciela, they were happy and already considered Navarre part of their family, and that it was Navarre who had invested in their business, and that was why it was thriving. And that he remembered the day he visited his father-in-law and saw him and his children, and that's why Charles had made up this lie, so that Daniel wouldn't know that Graciela, when she had a break from her job and her contract, went back to Argentina to see her family, and that's when they told them everything. When Daniel heard what the foreigner had said, he said sadly to his father-in-law, "Mr. Charles, did you know that? Did you know that your daughter had started a family with someone else behind my back? Why all this?" At which point, Charles hit back at his former son-in-law. "Daniel, my daughter had the right to be happy, and Navarre showed with his attitude how much he loves my daughter, and even got my other daughter Rose a job. And yes, Daniel, those kids aren't my nephews and grandnieces. They are my grandchildren, and I love them very much. You didn't appreciate my daughter. She's found someone who appreciates her." Sylvia added, "That's it, Daniel. The boy is the father of my grandchildren, and no matter what I think, these boys have given us joy. When you broke our daughter's heart." And at that moment, Navarre intervened for the first time in the conversation and said, "Yes, Graciela never hid from me that she was married, and I know that you wanted her to accept an open marriage. In my country, this is frowned upon, even more so with the Anglican Church in my homeland, which abhors such a thing. Even though there have been a few cases in my country's history, I don't want you to blame Graciela. I decided to take this step, and I don't regret having gotten involved with Graciela. So much so that I took on my children, and I'm here in front of you to do things legally and without fighting. In my home country, a king had the courage to fight for the love of an American commoner, and even sacrificed his throne for her, and he knew that she was married but unhappy in her marriage. As is the case with my beloved Graciela, who was married, but sad and unhappy with her constant betrayals. Graciela never hid from me that she was a married woman, and she was honest with me from the start." At that very confused moment, Daniel said with a sad look on his face, "Listen, Graciela, I know I've made you suffer with this open marriage thing and everything, but you went off to start a family with someone else so quickly, and I still had hopes of trying to repair our marriage. This is very sad for me, and I'm sorry to say that I was the architect of all this." And again, Navarre intervened and said, "That's why Graciela and I are here, to solve this problem. Sign the divorce papers so that Graciela and I can get legally married before the law and men and be happy." Graciela then added, "That's right, Daniel. You were unfaithful to me and made me suffer, and I'm under no obligation to be faithful to you if life has given me a real chance to be happy with a true love. Don't forget that you're to blame for all this. If you have to blame someone, be yourself, and no one here but you triggered this whole situation. I did my duty as a wife until that disgusting day that I want to erase from my life." And Daniel was even more heartbroken by what Graciela said, and at that moment Daniel, his voice breaking, said, "Graciela, I'm really sorry for everything I've done to you. It's sad, and I recognize that I and you, Navarre, are to blame for all this. How can you get involved with a married woman and still have children with her? I recognize that I don't have the morals to charge you for anything. But all this has taken me by surprise, and now I'm even more devastated, and my last hope of reconciliation has gone up in smoke." And Navarre intervened again and said to Daniel, "I'm sorry your marriage has ended like this, but I love Graciela, and I want to spend the rest of my life with her, and for us to raise our children together with the help of my in-laws, who I've already seen are great people. We'll give you financial compensation and even offer you therapy to get you out of all this, but your marriage is no longer safe. It's a waste of time fighting for what's already dead." After much discussion, and Daniel seeing that he was responsible for all this, that his ex-wife already had a family with another man, Daniel saw that there was no reason to continue with this, and Daniel said humbly, "Really, Graciela, I have no one to blame but myself. You deserve to be happy and move on. I hope you raise your children and that everything works out for you and your new husband." Daniel very sadly signs the divorce papers, and as promised, Navarre pays a sum of £10,000, which later becomes exactly 11,457,600 Argentine pesos. They soon helped Daniel with therapy, and the man decided to turn his life around. Determined to change his fate, he recognized that he had lost Graciela forever, but his ex-wife deserved to be happy. And in less than a month, Charles, Sylvia, Rose, Navarre, and Graciela, together with their children, returned to England, and 2 months later, they were married in the traditions of the Anglican Church of England, which made Charles and Sylvia happy, and Navarre and Graciela's children were also happy with their parents' marriage. And Rose also soon met a British citizen, who also fell in love with her, and they soon started a romance and were making wedding plans. As for Daniel, he went through individual therapy to recover from the losses he had suffered, and also to learn from the mistakes of his past. Daniel never married or had children again, and remained single as a kind of self-punishment for the mistakes of his past, although Graciela encouraged him to move on, just as she did, and things gradually got better for Daniel. But he still regretted losing Graciela because of adventures, but wished her to be happy with her new love, and that everything